Today we are going to be looking at the software called the Realizable IMAN software, and our topic of discussion is to discover a code-free and simple way to integrate your business systems. My name is Sue Herman, and I'm one of the consultants at Frontline Systems. You know, the hardest thing that I had to do to prep for this lunch and learn was answer this question, what is IMAN? And the reason why it was so hard for me was because this is such a powerful, flexible piece of software. So let me answer the question by telling you a couple of things it can do. First of all, it allows us to create seamless integrations between multiple software applications. So that means we can take something like a Magento web store and Sage 300 and use IMAN to connect that data together. That is actually one of the demos that I'm going to show you today. The other things that we can do, we can schedule and automate processes. So for example, we can use inside Sage 300, we can create and post transactions. We can print standard Sage 300 forms and reports. We can also create our own types of reports or pieces of information and schedule those to be emailed out. IMAN is one of those things where it just has a lot of different options for you. So we'll dig into that a bit. And one of the things that Realizable says about themselves is that you can create easy code-free configurations. Now, I'll tell you that I've added the quotes around the words code-free because it isn't entirely code-free. I need to know a bit of SQL and some VB scripting to really manipulate the data. But as we go through this demo, you'll understand why they describe it in that way. I have this wonderful client called Core Products International, and they were sweet enough to allow me to use their live IMAN today for the demo. And I thought they were a great example of what you can do with IMAN because they originally purchased IMAN for their Magento web store to Sage 300 integration. They've had a Magento web store for a number of years, and Magento is an industry-leading standard web store software. They love all of the functionality that it had to it. The only downside was that out of the box, there wasn't an integration to their Sage 300 ERP system. And so they spent a year with the programming house hand-building a customization. For any of you who have done customizations before, as you know, I'm married to a programmer, so I am not dissing programmers in the slightest, but programming takes time. It takes quite a while to build out the logic of a customization. And so it took them a year to get the integration in place, and quite frankly, they just weren't happy with it. Part of the reason was it didn't do everything that they wanted it to do. Core Products is one of those companies that is constantly looking for ways to be more efficient and more automated. And so they wanted the ability to come up with new ways to streamline how they process things. And every time the web store was involved in that change, they had to go back to a development house and ask them to make the change. And it took time and it was costly. So we came in with IMAN a little over a year ago, and it took about a month to replace what their current integration was doing. So already you can see it took a 12th of the time to put an integration piece in. So it was obviously a lot less expensive. I think we've estimated it cost them 10 to 25% of what the original integration cost them. But then on top of that, that integration from day one was a lot more seamless. And what I mean by that was, back with the original integration, a customer service person still had to touch the order, still had to make some modifications. They estimated they were spending about 5 minutes per order, changing things and telling it to print and whatnot. And so what we've been able to do with this IMAN job is not only clean it up so much that customer service doesn't even have to look at the order anymore, but they finally have decided that the logic is so good that they just want the, they call it the pick-pack slip, but basically the packing slip to print out to shipping automatically as soon as the order is placed so that production can go ahead and get that order packed. So now that I've kind of given you a little background on this, let's go ahead and I'm first going to jump over to Magento here. And we're inside the management piece, the back end of Magento. And what I just wanted to show you is that this is a list of the orders that they've received recently on their web store, and you'll notice that they have a status. There's a couple here that have a status of processing, which means those are brand new orders that haven't actually been pushed into Sage 300 yet. And then they've got some out here that have the status of CC terms, and that's basically that status field is what we use to tell Magento and tell ourselves that yes, this order is in Sage 300 now, and it's actually gone through. So I'm going to jump over to Core Products server here, and I'll mention IMAN is what we call an intranet software, which means we install it on a server. Typically, you might want to put it on its own virtual if you're going to be using it heavily for a lot of different scheduled processes. It does require at least SQL Express, if not a full version of SQL, in order to run. So I'm going to go ahead and double-click on IMAN here. And I apologize for the screen size on this. Unfortunately, if I make it any bigger, it's going to get very fuzzy on you. So hopefully everybody can see it here. I'm going to log into IMAN. What's great about an intranet software is the fact that once this is installed and set up on the server, I can, from any other workstation in their domain, as long as I have the right path and the login and password, I can get into IMAN without having to install anything on the workstation. So there are three parts of IMAN. There's the design section where we actually build the jobs. There's a scheduling section where, of course, you can tell it how often to run those jobs. And jobs can be run daily, hourly, every 15 minutes, what have you. And then there's the setup section, which is the administration section of IMAN. This is where we go in and we tell it how to hook to various databases. We do the user rights in here. There's some other functionality in here that we'll talk about in a little while. But let's go ahead and we'll jump into the design section for a minute. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up the Core Web Store job. And I'm going to go ahead and hit this little pencil button to edit the job. And we're going to pop into the Transform tab. So let's go back to that comment I made about code-free configuration. As I mentioned, when a programmer does a customization, he has to write all of it in some type of programming language. What IMAN does for us is it gives us these little steps, these icons here. And each of these icons do a variety of tasks. So for example, if I come over here on the left side and I look at the readers, here are all the different types of reading tasks that you can do. In other words, the CSV Reader is basically saying, if you give me a CSV file, I'll go read the data from it and let you see it and do something with it. So we've got a database reader. We can read from Excel. There's quite a variety in here. It also has transforms. Transforms are basically, I want to take the information that you gave me and I want to manipulate it in some way. So for example, for Core Products, the way that the data for that order looks like on the web is maybe not exactly the way that they want it to look when it comes into the system. And so we're going to manipulate that information a bit and get it into a Sage 300 type approved format. The connectors. So the connectors are something that you can purchase in addition to the base IMAN product. In the case of Core Products, they have two connectors in place for this job. They've got a connector to the Magento software and a connector to the Sage 300. It's always recommended, when possible, to read and write to the data through the software layer. Obviously, IMAN will allow you to write directly to a database, but due to data integrity issues, it's not something we always recommend. There are also writers, which is basically, I'd like to write a file, I'd like to create an Excel file, that kind of stuff. And then we have some additional tasks down here. So notice that there's an email task. You can push something up to an FTP file server. You could move, create, copy files, and so on. And by creating these little action items here, it seriously minimizes the amount of time that we have to spend writing code. So let's go ahead and go into some of these steps over here that I have for this job. And what's great about IMAN is I can literally look at this job and determine what is going on with this job without even going into the details of each of the steps, because the icons tell me a little bit about what's happening. So if you see the ones with the two red weird little logos on them, those are Magento icons. And so I can tell by this one, because it has the little arrow coming in, that this is me reading Magento Web Store data. The other one has an arrow going out. That's me actually writing information back to the Magento Web Store. So if we just step through this really quick, what you're going to see here is we read the data from Magento. We manipulate the data, so I'm creating formulas, I'm doing some logic for expected ship dates, I'm figuring out what location that item should ship from. All that kind of stuff is being figured out with formulas inside these 3 steps. We're creating a miscellaneous charge line. One of the things that Magento does is if they charge freight on an order, that comes over as just a part of the total. There's a freight line in the header. And if you guys have worked with Sage 300 before, you know that the way that freight is handled in Sage 300 order entry is that you have to enter a miscellaneous charge line. And so this little icon here allows us to create that miscellaneous charge line. This funnel thing tells me I'm filtering information out before I get to my most important step, which is the one with the little teardrop here. That's actually me posting the order to Sage 300. And then we're taking some of that data, and then I'm going to Magento, and I'm updating the status of the order so that the next time this job runs, it doesn't grab the same order and try and pull it in. This bottom layer section is an addition that we've made in the past few weeks. Basically what it's doing is, again, we're filtering it a little bit before we run this, but it's printing the pick-pack slip that I mentioned directly to production. So as soon as that order hits Sage 300, they're getting a pick-pack slip in the printer so that they know it's ready to go ahead and ship. And then I'm actually marking using an optional field on the Sage 300 order entry screen to flag that it was printed. So let's pop into the first one of these. And let me just mention, this is the most complicated job of the 3 that I'm going to show you. I'm starting with the most complicated and going to the easiest as we go through. And partly because the web store piece is the best example of all the different things that you can do with IMAN here. So the first time that you come into one of these steps, the screen is going to look different based on the type of task that it is. So this one, of course, is reading the Magento information. And the first time that you refresh this one, because it has to go out to the website, and it's looking for orders that have a processing status, it takes a little while to refresh. Now, funny thing, the scheduled event runs at 11:40. So unfortunately for me, I bet if I come back out here and hit search again, I don't have anything that's set to process. So hang with me for just a second, and let me set one of these back to processing so you can actually see it previewing here. Submit. Great, so we've got one back to processing. I was really afraid that was going to happen as well. And so if I come in here and scroll over, I'm seeing a whole bunch of information about the detail lines for this order. And as you'll see, some of this data comes over from Magento very messy. Like this whole section has a whole bunch of information in it that I grabbed from. And so this is part of the reason why having the ability to manipulate data before you post it to ACPAC is so important. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop into one of these transforms so I can also show you that every step of the way you can hit refresh and you can see the information that it's pulling at the time. And what you should see this time is as I scroll all the way over to the end, you'll see some additional fields here that I'm sure you didn't notice because I didn't really point it out before. Everything that starts with FMT is a formula that I've created to format some information. So let me pop into the second tab here, and I'm going to scroll through these 100 or so fields and formulas. I'm going to get all the way to the end. And I'm going to grab one of these, and I'm going to double-click on it just so you can see the part that I do not consider code-free. If you're going to create a formula and manipulate information, you do need some VB scripting. And I'll just mention that VB scripting is it's a little finicky. It's case-sensitive. But as I scroll down here, what you'll see that I'm doing, actually I picked a rather complicated one. They've actually had me add some holiday logic very recently. So in other words, if we get orders in on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, they want to make sure that Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right after that Wednesday, are not considered valid ship dates. And so this logic in here, it's doing a loop to basically say, grab me the next ship date that will actually work. So like I said, IMAN limits the coding needed. There is still some coding in here. All right, so now that we have, the last one I want to pop into, because I don't want to take you through all of these, is just the Sage 300 one, because it is, once you get all of the data in the right format, the Sage 300 piece, as far as how you tell it to post to Sage 300, is actually pretty clean. So on the Options tab of this task for the Sage 300 connector, I've told it I want to hook to the order entry screen. I've told it I want to insert orders. And then on the Field Mapping tab, I've actually come in here and I've said, hey, by the way, this formula that I did for the Ship To contact, I want you to actually post it to the Sage 300 field called Ship To contact. So that's kind of how we go through and assign it to the job. So now that we've looked at a couple of the tasks on here, I would love to go into more detail, but unfortunately I'm running out of time and I've got 2 more examples to show you. Let me just go ahead and we'll pop over to scheduling. And I'll show you my little magic trick. So we have this order here, W235645. I'm going to go ahead and go to my web store orders here. I think it's this one. And you'll see I've got a scheduled event here that runs hourly. And I've written in here that it runs for every 40 minutes after the hour. We're going to go ahead and just double click on a new row there, and I'm going to hit the checkbox, and it's actually going to run through the process right now. Now, I happen to pick an order that the system had already processed here, so don't be real shocked if we get a warning or error message that says that the order already exists. That's actually a really good thing. That proves that it's working properly. So let's just go ahead and run. You'll notice that it's giving me standard Sage 300 little notifications of, by the way, a price list doesn't exist for this item. It didn't stop that. That was just a warning. It didn't stop it from posting. But notice it did not actually finish this order because it found that the order already existed. And then if we go farther, it tells me that the job has completed. So that is the scheduled event, and that is about the fastest way I can get you through a Magento to Sage 300 integration that I know of. Let me just also mention one of my other clients. I've got a client who owns quite a few hotels, and every day they get a CSV file from each of the hotels that tells them all of the income and expenses that have happened for that day. And so what we've done for them is we've taken those CSV files and we've created an IMAN job that sucks that information in, manipulates it, assigns GL accounts, and creates a GL journal entry. So when I talk about integration, it doesn't necessarily have to be a software to software. Sometimes it can just be taking outputted information from another application and bringing it into something. Our second case study, I was trying to come up with some from Core Products. They've got quite a few jobs. I wanted to come up with some that were very different from each other. So the next one that I chose for you is what's called a disassembly batch. Core Products uses a manufacturing software called AutoSimply. And in AutoSimply, you go in and you say, I want to build 100 of this item, and it builds it for you, and it consumes the components, and it creates the finished good. And this happens, I don't know why this happens, but every once in a while, a user will enter that they made 100 of them, and what they really mean is that they made 98. And so somebody is having to come back and say, no, 2 of those we didn't actually assemble. We'd like you to take the 2 finished goods off the shelf because they don't exist, and we'd like you to put all the components back. The way that AutoSimply handles it is if you want to disassemble, you have to disassemble the entire 100. And then you have to rebuild the 98. And so Core said, well, is there a way that we could get around this? And so here's what we did for them. I'm going to go back into IMAN here. And actually, for just a minute, I'm going to log in as a different user than admin. I'm going to log in as the user who runs this job, because I want to just show to you that when I'm logged in as Holly, for example, I'm clicking on the Design tab. It's not actually letting me get over there. So what I love about IMAN is that I can allow somebody who really knows utterly nothing about IMAN, and if they had access to things could be really dangerous and would terrify me, I can allow them access to just the things that they need to see. So in Holly's case, what we did was I wanted to give her a way to tell me about the items that she wanted to disassemble. I wanted to give her a way to give me the item number, the quantity, and the location that those should be disassembled from. So let me just go in here for a minute, and I'm going to add one more item just so you can see how easily she does this. And we'll go ahead and do 5 of these items, and we'll take them from a different location, PLC. So now I have my list of my 3 items that I want to disassemble. I want to disassemble 1 of the first one, 2 of the second, 5 of the third, and here are the locations I want to disassemble them from. And then she goes over to the scheduling screen, and notice that she only has access to the 2 jobs that she actually runs in here. So she picks the disassembly batch. She clicks here to run the schedule, and she hits the little green arrow, and that's going to start processing now. In just a minute. I'm just going to wait long enough to see that it actually started processing, and then I'm going to go ahead and log out, and I'm going to log back in as admin so I can go over to the job and just really quickly kind of show you what that looks like. Okay. Go to the core disassembly batch here. Okay. And if I pop into the steps, so the first thing you're going to see in these steps is something that says DB with the arrow coming in. So we're actually reading information from the SQL database. And I've shown you already that the VB scripting is useful for the formulas that you have to create. This is where SQL comes in handy. Now, this is actually a very simplistic, kind of horrible example to show you, because you can't get SQL any simpler than this. Clearly, what I've done is I've actually gone and created a view inside SQL and done all of my logic there, and then just told this thing, hey, by the way, go grab all the fields I created in the view. So just know that if you want to read from a SQL database, this is typically where you would build that out, and it usually, quite often, looks a lot more complicated than this. But let's go ahead and hit the refresh. And you'll see I'm literally grabbing every single finished good that's in the system right now and all of the components on that bill of material. I'm grabbing the cost for the components, the unit of measure, how much of that component is actually needed to build the finished good, etc. And then we're manipulating the data a little bit, and actually in this step where I'm doing the transform, I'm also querying what items did Holly enter into that list over on the setup screen. I'm filtering the information, so I'm basically saying, hey, by the way, I know I told you to query all of the finished goods and all the components, but really I just want the ones that Holly had on her list. Please just pull those items for me. And then I turn it into, I take that data and I turn it into a hierarchy so I know what I want to put in the header information of the IC adjustment batch versus the details. And then this last little thing before we post it to ACPAC, I was able with all of that query and manipulation to get the component information and say, increase the components and cost by this much. But I needed an additional line that would decrease the finished goods and take that off of the shelf. And so that's what this one does. And then the last spot here, of course, is actually posting it to inventory control here. All right, so what I'm going to do is now that that job has run, I'm going to actually go over to the IC adjustments in Sage 300 and hit the finder. And I'm going to look for batches that are only entered. And what you're going to see here are the batches that I actually created today. And we built the job so that each of the items has its own batch. So let me actually pop into the FIB 200 here because this is a great example. One of the things that happens when you do a disassembly batch is that if you use so little of the components that it actually, you're not even using a penny's worth of your inventory, you have this problem because the adjustments have to be a penny or greater. And so we had to build logic in here that said, on certain items, we want you to increase or decrease both the cost and quantity. On certain things, we only want you to do the quantity. So some of this logic is quite complicated, but IMAN does it in a beautiful fashion. All right, I only have 3 minutes left. Yikes. so let me do this. Let me jump over to my last one, and I'll try to do this as quick as I can. This last one I chose because it's one of those situations where it's not saving them a lot of time and energy. It's saving them a lot of frustration, and it's saving their customer a lot of annoyance. Core Products has one of their biggest customers sends orders to them daily, tons of orders. Most of those orders come over via EDI. Every once in a while, about once every 3 or 4 days, they get one non-EDI order. And the customer asks, could you pretty please, whenever that order ships, could you send us an email with an Excel sheet on it, giving us the tracking information for that order? And what was happening is that customer service, because it happens so infrequently, they were forgetting to send the email out. The customer was getting frustrated. And so we used IMAN to basically take this off the plate of customer service. And so the way that we did that, let me pop back in, minimize that. Let me quick pop over to the job. Sorry, I can't seem to move my mouse without actually muttering at the same time. So let me see. We are looking for this one here, and I will go through this lickety-split. Basically, I'm looking at the core SQL database, Sage 300 database, to see if any orders shipped today. I'm manipulating that data a little bit. I'm creating an Excel sheet. I'm putting it in an email, and I'm asking that email to be sent out. And then it creates, in order to create the Excel sheet and send it out as an attachment, it's actually saving that Excel sheet to a location in a folder. And so I'm actually telling it, if the email went successfully, please move that Excel sheet to archive or get it out of the way so it doesn't accidentally email it out later. And let me just, in this one, let me just pop into the email screen for just a minute so I can show you what that looks like. So on this one, again, it's an email task. I have the ability to type in email addresses. I could actually use formulas here, so I could reference formulas that I've created earlier in the job. I can do the same thing with the email body. It can either be a hand-typed email body, or you can reference formulas there as well. And then you'll notice at the bottom here there is also an attachment, and I'm telling it where to find that Excel sheet that it created and send that out. And if I pop over to my email, I happen to still be on the email list for this, I'm getting copied on it. You'll see here is my email body. Here's what basically this customer is getting. And if I pop this open, you will see a beautiful Excel sheet with one single solitary invoice on it with tracking information. Ta-da! Wow, I can't believe I did it. I actually finished in the 30 minutes. Okay, so let me do this. Let me go ahead and unmute everybody here as soon as I remember how. There we go. Okay, the phones are open from my side. I want to open it for questions. Also, feel free, if you'd rather, you can send me questions on the chat. So if anyone has questions, please go ahead.
No questions, but very nice.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear you liked it.
We've actually used it a lot for EDI importing.
Oh, wow. That's cool. Is that Lisa?
From TrueCommerce imports, and actually 810 extracts, and so a lot of different back and forth through different EDI software packages.
Yeah, when you don't have a good integration solution for EDI, I think IMAN would be an excellent fit for that. I totally agree. That's awesome. Oh, I did miss one question here. Okay, so the question is, can you read-write to databases other than 300? Okay, so I've mentioned Sage 300, I've mentioned Magento. I should have mentioned Sage CRM. You also have the ability, hopefully, I went through it pretty fast, but in the readers here, notice that they have a database reader. So you could actually read or write to any SQL database, as well as I mentioned, reading from files and stuff. So hopefully that answered that question. All right, again, just thank you everybody for joining us today. I hope you learned a lot, and we'll see you at the next Lunch and Learn.